Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys for another show, for another episode of our Tactical Breakdown podcast. It's been a little bit of a bit of a chore, a bit of a while since we've done one of these. Me and Drew, believe it or not, have lives, and so haven't been able to squeeze one of these in quite a while. But we're here to talk about Julian Brandt, which obviously a player is on the lips of many Arsenal fans right now, having been linked via The Athletic and letting us know that we have been tracking him, scouting him, looking about him as a possibility to solve our creative problems. Drew, how are you, fella? Are you well? Are you good?
Yeah, it's good. It's a good Monday. I guess it's easier to be happy when you beat Chelsea. So, yeah, doing all right.
Dave Lennon in the chat says, "Bring me Julian Brandt." So we know that Dave is certainly a fan. You did on Twitter a thread which basically informed everyone about who Julian Brandt is, what he does, and if you want to find that, it says on your screen there, Drew, it's at FM Lera. Have you seen that? Did you see that? Have you seen that it says that on your screen?
Yeah, on your screen? To change it.
You can change that. I mean, I could change it if you like. At what? Flabbergasted FC?
Flabbergasted FC. Yep.
Let's see if that works. So there we go. So at Flabbergasted FC. Is that right? Have I spelled that correctly? I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. So in terms of Julian Brandt, the first thing I've got written down, just tell people who don't know who Julian Brandt is, who is Julian Brandt, Drew?
Someone kind of said it already in the chat. He likened him to like a German Madison, and for me, I think he's kind of a similar player in that regard. I feel like, he came through as a winger and kind of got his education there, but he's a player for me who almost kind of symbolized the more modern German football. He's incredibly good technically. Or unlike someone like Timo Werner, who just relied on just like his pace, his understanding of space. Brandt, I think, was more refined in that way, and I feel like a lot of people, had a lot of high hopes for him, and a lot of were disappointed. Like back in 2018 when Germany's poor World Cup showing, a lot of people wanted him to get more minutes in that tournament because he could have offered something more, that technical quality where the team was lacking. And for me, he's that type of player. He's humble. He puts his head down. Kind of similar to Havertz as well. Like, they both came through with a lot of promise, but they've never really sort of taken to the hype. And if you think about other players who maybe have, and whether careers have gone off the back of that, I mean, people will have a lot of other complaints about him moving forward, and we can talk about that later. But the fact that he's just quiet, he works, and for me, on the mental aspect of it, I think he's mature. He's just that type of player. That's for me. That's the best way I could sum him up. Yeah, it reminds me a lot of Santi Cazorla in a way, not because they're identical players.
We will talk about that. I know you wanted to bring that up. We'll talk about the Santi Cazorla comparison, and we'll talk about that in a bit. And it'll kind of link in, I suppose, to talking about his position, which Arsenal are in desperate need of central creativity. Hence why we were linked to Aouar, hence why we were linked to Buendia, Szoboszlai, all of these guys.
Yeah.
Is Brandt... It's a very simple question, but obviously it could come with a complicated answer. Is Brandt enough that he walks into Arsenal's team and adds the creativity that we have desperately needed?
I think yes, but a lot of it is contingent for me on the system. This is kind of something where in the thread I kind of alluded to it, but we can go a bit more in depth. So for me, as I said, he came as a winger, but I think for me he's better centrally. I think he's more built to be in the center of the park, being even more involved, not so much on the periphery. He's played as a 10. He's played as an 8 now. I think that's kind of where he really thrives because he does have that quality in tight spaces to beat a man. If he doesn't have an immediate pass, he can beat one player, and then he can find a pass. Whereas most midfielders at Arsenal, they're not capable of beating the man to present their pass if they don't have if they don't get the ball and there's no pass available. That's why we pass it back and forth and all the time, because they don't have that technical quality to go ahead and find the chance themselves to make that pass or to go for goal as well. And I think for me, he does solve a lot of problems, and that's kind of why I likened him to Cazorla in a way that That's what made him so good. You know, he received the ball, he could beat 1-2 because he was aware. So he had to rely on his ability to beat players. Brandt's had that same education as well. And I think that's been something we're really lacking. I think you could probably argue that Parker is maybe the only midfielder we have that can actually take the ball and drive a bit before looking for a pass. You know, Xhaka, El Neni, you know, they're not that kind of player. Even Ceballos, you see him.
He can drive, but he's changed. He's changed.
Yes, he gets the ball and he passes it on as well. I feel like the players we have that don't want to take the responsibility. But I feel like Brandt has it very much in him as a player that he wants to eat up space. And again, someone put that also in the chat, so it's a good shout. He wants to take that space when he sees it. So for me, I think that's incredibly important because we're lacking that at the minute. And I think it's what made Smith Rowe so refreshing against Chelsea is even when he came deeper, he picked the ball up and he wanted to run. He didn't just pick the ball up and pass it. Sometimes he did when there was no, you know, logical way to progress play, but he does want to progress play, and Brandt brings that. And I think if you can have a few players in the team that will do that, it helps. And I think that's kind of one of the things that I think fans don't mention about Mesut Ozil, about what we lack without him. It's not just his creativity; it's the fact that Mesut Ozil also would take space when it presented itself. And without that kind of player in the team, it's a very different thing. And we're so easy to defend against. I think Brandt solves that problem. He's not a perfect player. He's not an elite player, but he does give us the improvements in the areas where we're struggling at the minute. And if you look at it, just under those terms, that's all you should really factor in for me. And I think that's why I'm really excited about the potential of it happening. I don't know if it's going to happen. I have reservations about it, but the fact that we're looking at that type of player, and he's tactically versatile. He can still play out on the left. He can play as a 10. He can play as an 8. So when Arteta jigs the formation, you can still see him in the 11, just maybe in a slightly different role, but he'll still give you something. And I don't think we have very many players at the club that actually can do that, particularly midfielders. So
let's talk about then kind of the problems that he has got. No player is perfect. We talked about that off air briefly, and he left Bayer Leverkusen where he made his name. That was where he gained a lot of his stock and where he was most sort of highly rated, and he made that move to Borussia Dortmund. Obviously, was a great partner of Kai Havertz when they were both together at Leverkusen too. They've both moved on. They've both found issues since moving on to their new clubs. Brandt left obviously earlier than Havertz, but what did you make of the move to Dortmund, and why hasn't he necessarily been able to emulate exactly to the same sort of level as he did at Bayer Leverkusen since moving to Dortmund?
So I think one of the biggest things is, first of all, Leverkusen, he was very much one of the main focal points in that side. You know, him, Havertz, and then you had Kevin Volland as well. Those are the three attacking players they wanted most on the ball. At Dortmund, it's different. It's about Haaland, it's about Sancho, it's about those kind of players. You know, Marco Reus, and then you had Torgan Hazard, who was in brilliant form last season as well. Those are the kind of players who you would consider like the main threats. You know, get them into positions. There's so many other players that can provide, can bring you goals. So Brandt isn't now. He's not one of the highlights. It's more of he's there and he does a role very, very well, but he's not going to be one of the main accent points. So that's why things like, you know, maybe his expected assists would have dropped, or you know, and then when people look at just base stats like that, they just say, oh well, he doesn't create enough as much as Buendia or Awa or someone like that. So how good is he really? You know, but you have to apply data in the context, and when you apply data in the context, it's still very good. Like you and I were talking before, and I didn't know when you wanted to bring it up, but the amount of passes and how accurate his passes are into the box, into the final third, still shows that he is very adept at playing penetrative football, and that's something we lack. So I think for me, it's just that kind of simple. His role is a bit different now as well. He's used deeper, more so than he was at Leverkusen, and also this season in particular, Dortmund have just been incredibly disjointed. That's the first thing, but the second thing is he's only started 6 out of 13 in the league, but he's also played in 5 different positions already this season in 13 outings, including center forward, and he's not a center forward. So
right.
It's hard to really build and get consistent form when you don't know when you're going to be deployed and where, in what capacity. It's hard to really get that platform for form. So I think for me, that's been how I've observed his biggest struggle. You're going to be inconsistent when you're used inconsistently and in an inconsistent manner. You can't expect a player to perform at the same level week in, week out. It's just not feasible. It's not possible. And then last season, I think you kind of saw what he could bring. His assist totals were very good. The amount of chances he would create, he was a very good player. And a lot of Dortmund fans were really excited when they brought him in because of how good he is technically. They were also kind of crying out for that as well. I think that's also kind of why you see something like Gio Reyna now thriving, is because Gio Reyna is so good on the ball. It's another way to beat your man, another way of playing. It's not just, possession build up and relying on chains. So I think that the jury's kind of still out, like with Favre gone now, presumably Marco Rose is going to come in. That's the heavy favorite, and Dortmund want him. So if he was to come in, you could look at him and say he would want a player like Brandt in his team.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to see if he's available and that kind of thing. But I think he still has a future there. He's only a year and a half into his deal in the first place. They just bought him last season, so it's not like he's 3 years in and it hasn't been working. He had an overall very good season last term. He's struggling this season, but every player at Dortmund struggling this season. So you have to look at that in that context as well. So it's hard to say he's been poor. If he was poor and everybody else has been playing very well, then you could say it's one thing. But you can count on half of one hand how many players played well this season at Dortmund so far. Not even Sancho has played well this season so far. So again, if you apply that context, you just look at it and say, well, it's got to be a larger problem that's filtering down into the players' performances, and you have to see how they build on that moving forward. So I'm not so critical as some others who have replied in the Fed about him, being average at best, and that kind of just like,
it just annoys me with that. And the thing is, when I see comments like that, it's usually because he's not the player that they want. That's right. Usually 9 times out of 10 that's the reason why he's like, no, he's average. I want Aouar, or I want Szoboszlai, and for that reason, just because you wanted a different player does not mean that suddenly this other guy that was being linked is suddenly bad or is suddenly not as good. And you need to kind of look at these things objectively, and that's a real struggle for some to be able to do that. There was a question from Christopher Fung in the chat. He says, can Brandt be easily taken out of the game by an opposing manager, or is he able to affect a game in multiple ways?
He can affect the game multiple ways. Again, he can sit deeper. He has a really good eye for a pass. The type of pass Xhaka made against Chelsea, Brandt can easily do that as well. But again, if a team is sitting off deep and the chains aren't working, say movement ahead of them is poor, we've seen that so many times from Arsenal over the last couple of years where things are just stagnant on the pitch, right? He can affect the game by then driving that play. And we've talked about it a lot, how we just want players to pick the ball up, to draw men out of their shape, to beat a 1 or 2, and then all of a sudden you beat a man, you beat a second man, there's more space in front of you. There's defenders now have to make a choice. If those options present itself, then all of a sudden breaking down a deep block, for an example, becomes easier. Like I was thinking about the West Brom match coming up. And they're in poor form, but they have so many 1-0 losses because they're so hard to break down. And usually you have to rely on individual quality to break a team down, and Brandt has that. So for me, those are the 2 main ways he can affect the game. He's not afraid to take a pop from distance. And the joke was, should we shoot more or whatever as a club? But he's not afraid to shoot from outside the area. And you've seen that in multiple ways over the course of his career, certainly at Leverkusen. You've seen it for Germany. He has a killer left foot, which is great. We haven't really had that, since Podolski, really. I think Xhaka's got a good left foot, but, Brandt as well, kind of on that level, if not better. So there's a lot of facets to his game that, again, I feel like we don't really have as midfielders. And again, I kind of stated, and I feel like you brought it up, when the minute we were linked to someone like Hasamawa or Szoboszlai, fans, that's all the fans wanted to see. Those deals had to happen. If they didn't happen, then it's no player's ever going to be good enough in their eyes. You know what I mean? So a lot of the criticisms I think for Brandt are just because he's simply not Aouar or Szoboszlai. But again, he's not perfect. But I feel like if you look at the team we have at the minute and where we are as a club at the minute, someone like Brandt improves us. And that's the only factor that you have to figure out. I mean, I know then you could talk about the finances maybe, but he just makes us better for me. And I kind of, I think any potential issue would probably be offset by the fact that I think he could help us in a lot of ways that we struggle with right now.
I think that when you look at what ultimately Arsenal need, they need a player that is going to add creativity, the player that's going to break the lines and be swift in transition. Emile Smith-Rowe, for me, in the game against Chelsea, gave us everything that we've been lacking just by taking the ball, turning, taking players on, moving it forwards, taking it and playing it quickly, not doing a Ceballos, taking the ball and running then 20 yards and running into trouble. But as Emile Smith-Rowe takes the ball, and when he does run into space, he then moves the ball on at the right time. He's got that footballing brain to know when that happens. And I feel that from watching Brandt, he also enables you to do that. And if you've got someone of real quality, I don't buy the argument of if we bring someone in now, Emile Smith-Rowe's not going to be given that chance. If we're honest, Emile Smith-Rowe, we shouldn't be pinning all our hopes on this young kid to take us forwards. You can't do that as a club. It's the same thing with Saliba when it comes back to him. A lot of people would not want us to sign a right-sided centre-back because it might impact Saliba's progress. If Arsenal have the opportunity to bring in a player of quality and add it to the team, you do it. You can't be sentimental to these young guys all the time. And when it is being signed, you need to be smart about it. Brandt's age is really good as well, being in the sort of the mid-early 20s. That is really beneficial for Arsenal too, because you're signing a player with sell-on value. You're signing a player that, if you sign him as a new deal, he's going to then go into the latter stages of his career. So you've got a two-stage contract situation with the player, which is really beneficial for the club. You're not signing, say, an Isco or an Eriksen that you're signing at 28 years old that then has little to no sell-on value whatsoever and no guarantee of any kind of progress because they've been declining over the last year. The thing with Brandt is his output has slightly dipped because he's moved into a more competitive environment at Borussia Dortmund. It is no longer a standout like he was at Bayer Leverkusen. Similar kind of how we've seen Havertz. And there was a couple of questions on Havertz. I'll let you go for gold on that one before we go into the statistics on Wyscout. But what kind of comparisons can you make between Havertz and Brandt's kind of movement, and why maybe hasn't it so much worked out for Havertz as a comparison to his compatriot?
Well, that's just because Lampard's an idiot. That's it. I mean, and people say I'm not qualified to say that, but it's true. Like you look at the ways that Havertz has been deployed this season. You know, he's been put out on the right flank. He's not, just because he can do it doesn't mean he should. You know, he's not really been given that regularly, that sort of free central role where he can really affect the game. And yes, he does have to get up to speed with certain aspects of Premier League. And one of the things that people always love to say is that, you know, the Premier League is faster than Bundesliga. It's more physical. I mean, it's roughly the same playing speed. The difference between Premier League and Bundesliga is that Premier League players and managers rely more often on athleticism. Bundesliga is a more tactical league where teams on average are much more well structured. They rely on shape more. But teams still press as much, if not more, than Premier League sides. In fact, historically, over the last decade, if you look at pressing and interception statistics, Bundesliga usually has 2 or 3 teams in the top 5 in the top 5 leagues. So
yeah,
it's not about the fact that they don't know how to deal with pressure and being pressed. Same thing with Granit Xhaka. He you know, when he was at Gladbach, he got pressed constantly. But the fact is when teams are better structured, you can play through and out of presses a little bit better. Whereas Premier League relies more on the athleticism. But also because Chelsea's team also in their own right is very disjointed in a lot of ways. And we kind of saw that when we played them. You know, you had Timo Werner just stuck on a touchline on the left. Havertz wasn't playing, but you saw how isolated Werner was on so many occasions. We'd have 1, 2, or 3 people just kind of shuttling in on the touchline, and then he had no options available that he has to, so he might give the ball away. That wouldn't happen as much in Germany, where you'd always have someone available. Even lesser sides can operate in that manner. So I think for me, the struggle might be, you know, if he comes into a disjointed side and we're still not really playing the way Arteta wants to at the minute, would he struggle with that? And that's the thing is, I don't think he would. I think he's good enough to play his way out of trouble. And so is Havertz as well. But I do feel like I don't think he's very much up to speed just yet. It happens, you know. Also, if the kids of Brandt is older, he's more mature. He's deeper in his career as well. Havertz still is developing as a player. People forget how young he actually is. You know, yeah. He's not. You know, it takes time. So I'm not really concerned. I think the concern with Havertz as well is the amount of money Chelsea spent. Like, we're not about to spend that on Brandt if it did come off. So I think that's a lot of the angst, as well as Chelsea chucked a lot of money at him. So when you come with that price tag, you're more expected to settle and relatively immediately and start producing off the back. And right now he's not even guaranteed to start every match. I think that's the concern with Havertz. So it's a little bit of a different discussion for me. But no, overall, I wouldn't have concerns. I just think, just kind of really depends on fit. I don't think that Havertz should have gone to Chelsea in the first place, but I kind of said as such with you guys in the WhatsApp. I said as such in Yama's chat. I just thought it was a weird move for him, and I don't think it's going to end up necessarily panning out if Lampard doesn't do it. But sometimes there are players who, no matter how good they are, they still are reliant on how the system is structured overall. Again, a lot of players in football don't transcend systems. They don't transcend leagues, or they don't transcend responsibilities. They can just be very, 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 very good in multiple circumstances and sets of scenarios, but they might not thrive in every scenario. Only players like Messi can do that. Ronaldo, that ilk. Havertz isn't there yet, and while he has the potential to be, we don't know if he's going to be. So I just think for me, he took on too much at the minute. But I think Brent's at a good. Like you said, he's 24 now. He's highly experienced. He's been playing. I think this is his eighth season or seventh or eighth season in his career. So he's seasoned by now. He's a full German international, so he knows what it takes to play at a high level. So I'm not too concerned about that.
Okay, let's have a look at the statistics by just throwing up the Y-Scout onto your screen. So you should be able to see that now. Fingers crossed. Yes, you can. So I should zoom in maybe a little bit more. Looking at specifically passing, someone I wanted to highlight, this is from 2019-20, so this is last season. Looking at his passes into the penalty area, which is obviously something that we need to see more of at Arsenal, and talking about the penetrative kind of passing that goes around. And when Emile Smith Rowe came into the team against, I believe it was against Man City, well, that first kind of instance of Emile Smith Rowe coming in was a pass that was played through the defensive lines of Man City to Lacazette, who had an opportunity and a chance to strike at goal. It is something that's desperately needed at Arsenal, and with these statistics that are on screen here, and you should hopefully be able to see those passes into the penalty area there on that hand side, on the right hand side there, that 57.5%, which then increases in 2020 to 2021, which we've looked at as a arguably worse season for Brandt, up to 64.7. And it's not through less. He's actually averaging more passes into the penalty area this season, and he's doing it at a greater accuracy, playing, of course, with a team with arguably better movement in their forward line, better runs being made by the likes of Sancho and Haaland and whoever else is going to be in that lineup. So when you've got this amount of accuracy and this amount of chance creation, what do you feel about kind of those statistics that they're showing you?
I mean, it goes back to what I was saying before. Just he gives you that option that we kind of lack, but a lot of that is contingent on finding the space to make the pass. You can bypass midfield and play a ball over the top, but so often we're playing against teams that are sitting a bit deeper. We're not playing with freedom ahead of us. And I think that's one of the struggles that we've had, certainly this season. And I think that's kind of where, for me, I feel like we would really benefit with him coming into the team. It's his ability to be the man and then look for that pass that we're discussing right now. That killer pass to maybe someone like an Aubameyang, who makes a diagonal, or even Lacazette who makes a run. Martinelli, because we've seen how hard Martinelli wants to work. He wants to eat up space as well. So if we have a player that can regularly hit those runs, even the Tierney overlap, kind of the same thing. So we've got a player who can find a space to make the pass and then also make that pass. That's big, because you're not seeing Anani really do that. Ceballos has struggled with that. Questions about Maitland-Niles' passing ability are there. He works hard. He's intelligent, but his passes aren't particularly great and consistent. Same thing with Willock. So you're bringing in a player who excels in one or two ways where essentially almost everybody else in the team doesn't. And that's such a big boon that we would have in terms of the things that Arteta can do on a tactical level as well. So I think that's exactly kind of what you want to see.
If we have a look then at the attacking side of things in terms of course, his dribbling, this is where obviously my internet decides to just turn around and go, no, thank you. I don't want to show you these attacking statistics whatsoever, which is, to be fair, it's been absolutely awful all day. I don't know. There we go. So if we're looking at his dribbles, and the way he works on the ball, 3.67 dribbles per game on average, and with a 47.4% success rate. I mean, that's when you're looking at success rate of dribbles, the upper echelons are in the high 50s to 60s. So he's still slightly kind of below those upper really nailed on dribblers. But is that a massive part of his game, dribbling on the ball?
No, just because he can do it doesn't mean he's going to do it. And I feel like people just kind of, and again, this is kind of where I kind of go back to a lot of the fans sort of see football and statistics from the sense of almost like almost like a gaming standpoint, and this isn't to be disrespectful, but I kind of feel like there's a lot of misinformation about what is or isn't successful from a statistical standpoint. If you beat your marker 50% of the time, that's fine. The key then, the context applied is if you turn the ball over, where are you turning the ball over? Are you turning it over in the final third? Are you turning it over in our third? Are you turning it over in the middle of the park, but someone's covering you? Like, turning possession over is a normal part of football. The question is, like, how do you personally rebound from that, and how is the team structured to be able to cope with you losing possession? People always want to talk about how good, I don't know, someone like Eden Hazard was at beating his man. But there's a lot of times that Hazard would lose the ball 5, 6, 7 times in a row. But then the 1 or 2 times it came off really well, it would create a scoring chance. So for me, it's again, everything about data, you have to apply it in the right context. So 50% of the time is fine. The fact that he's still, if he's getting 3.67 successful dribbles, that means he's trying about 7 times a game to beat his man. And sometimes that can also be indicative of the system you're playing. If systems are broken down, you find yourself trying to beat your player even more, which could be also frustrating as well. But you can look at the amount of touches he gets in the penalty area is a big thing for me as well. So yeah, I just kind of feel like
more than 3 a game.
Yeah, which is good. It means he wants to get forward. And again, we don't see that from someone like a Granit Xhaka. It's not part of Thomas Partey's game. You're not going to see a lot of it from Dennis Ceballos either. Certainly not from Mohamed El-Neni. They might be right about 30 yards out, but they're not getting into the penalty area. Getting into the penalty area would be a big thing. We've missed that since Ramsey. His ability to make those late runs, get himself into the box, get a chance. That's big. So that's another little small part of his game. I feel like they would add a little bit of something as well.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of like, obviously you can overanalyze stats. I know that, it's just me. You can overanalyze stats, of course. I know that sounds a little bit ironic, me just saying that. I kind of look at this as an opportunity for Arsenal to bring in someone, as I've already mentioned, of the right kind of age, from a league and a system that I think would transition well if used in the right way. That's always going to be the biggest question. Is Brandt going to be used correctly if he is brought in? I feel that if he's played the same as Emile Smith-Rowe was played against Chelsea, we've got the great chance to see the best from him. It's always going to be a question now as we kind of come to the end of the show, talking about, which I know a lot of people have been asking in the chat box, is around the likelihood of it happening and the price that he would cost. Let me just have I don't know if you know off the top of your head how much he cost Dortmund specifically when they bought him.
He had his release clause, and honestly, but I always forget. I'll do it right now. It was 25 million. It was 25 million euro.
Okay.
That's your question. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was
£21.5 million pounds. Yeah.
Yeah. There you go.
So if you're looking at that, and he's been there for a year and a bit, they're going to ask for minimum 30. Minimum.
I mean, his current market value is about 30. So they would probably, in January, when they're not forced to sell, the player hasn't made any murmurings of wanting to go. He's not even 2 years into his current deal. I would be sure they'd probably want like between 35 and 40 would be my guess. This is also because like they don't know what the incoming long-term manager is going to want. Like you could easily have someone come in and feel like he's surplus to requirements. Dortmund do have a lot of central options. So if they feel like they can get on without him, it doesn't matter how good he is. You don't want to overload, your first team squad with too many in one position. So if they feel like they can get on without him, like they could easily want to sell him. But January is difficult, and typically, unless a player wants to actively leave, Dortmund normally don't sell in January. The Oba deal, he was boycotting training. He wanted to go. That's a different example. But for me, I don't think they're going to. There's enough upheaval as well, and questions are on the team already. So I don't know if they're going to want to get rid of a player who last season was very, very good and could easily rejuvenate his form this season and become just as vital for the second half of the campaign. So It's a tricky one. I don't think they're going to want to, but if he says that he would want to leave, then they're not going to stop him either. They're just going to want to make sure that they get the money for him.
Yeah, I agree with you. I still can't believe that there are. I'm seeing comments asking for Eriksen over Brandt at this stage. I'm just like,
stop.
Why?
Eriksen, you know, I'm not going to start. Just never mind.
Don't start. There's no point. You'll never convince them otherwise. That's going to be where we round off our kind of look and chat about Julian Brandt. We hope that you have been a little bit more informed around the German, what he's like, his style, his positioning, and what he would do if he was to come to Arsenal, the best way to play him, and of course his kind of prospective value at the club. Of course, I'm not in the know about any regards to if he's going to be coming to Arsenal. I only know about what's been reported by The Athletic. So it's going to be interesting to see how Arsenal attack the January window regards to their creative targets. Buendia is obviously someone that the club are interested in as well. In the dream world, Arsenal should look to bring in two. Like we're in a situation where the club cannot put all their hopes on one creative attacking midfield signing when we're so lacking in that central creative sort of area of the pitch. I think though the priority for the window will be on looking at the outgoings, looking at getting the players out that we need to, moving on the players that we can, and shrinking this squad down because it is so overinflated with players that ultimately are not good enough for what we need to be doing at the club. We're going to really appreciate if you drop a like on the video. Make sure you follow Drew at FlabbergastedFC. Forever how long that's going to remain that way.
Until we stop being retarded.
We won against Chelsea.
It doesn't mean we're not still retarded.
It's gonna be, if we beat Brighton, is it then? Is it then or
no? Like we have to beat Brighton, we have to beat West Brom. You know, you've got to beat Newcastle coming up. Like these are all kind of the things I want to see at the moment.
Yeah. So. Okay. Fair enough. You can find us at the Goon Talk TV, at Tom Cantor Media on Twitter. Keep an eye on your feeds this evening. Should be some interesting news dropping a little bit later. Preview for the match against Brighton will either be a little bit later on this evening or tomorrow morning. I haven't decided. It'll be depending on time and work and stuff like that. So we'll see what happens there. Drop a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. And we will see you again very, very soon. And as always, and check out Drew's Get German Football News Top 100. Top 100? Top 100.
Top 100. Brandt's one of the players I have to write about. One of 14 players I have to write about. So, or total writing about. So, yeah, that'll be out sometime in the first week or two in the new year. So, look out for that.
Okay. Awesome. Right. Let's go. So, it's been a pleasure speaking to you as always. And as always, up the Arsenal.